of the dawn, when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong, in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the bold are drowned in mournful cries. Oh, we dreamt of a home where the rivers run free. Now we walk on the ruins of what was meant to be, shattered hopes and broken streams.
The bloody crisis that eventually led to what is now historically referred to as Operation Bonfire of the Enemies, the practice of dousing political opponents and their properties with petrol and setting them ablaze, was the direct result of the explosive political and ideological differences between the two main parties in the region, as well as personal animosity between the leaders of those parties, Chief Owolowo and Chief Owolowo. It also exposed the deep-rooted ethnic and regional divisions in Muguland, which would continue to play a significant role in the country's politics for several years to come. The fallout from the Bonfire of Enemies conflict, which led directly to the first military coup in Muguland, is still felt to this day in the Yorobawa parts of Muguland. Families loyal to either side of the personalities involved remained mortal enemies for decades thereafter. Even now, most would not join the same political associations and would not trust each other in any endeavor of significance. So how did it all go wrong so soon after independence? Soon after Chief Owolowo started serving his prison sentence, the state of emergency that was declared in Yorobawa region was lifted and Chief Owolowo was reinstated as the premier of the region. The election was then postponed for 1 year to ensure that tension had calmed down before asking people to go to the polls. When the elections in the Yorobawa region of Muguland finally held 5 years after independence, the Yorobawa Action Congress, led by Chief Owolowo, who was still languishing in prison, faced a strong challenge from the new Akola People's United Party, formed by Chief Owolowo after having been expelled from the ruling party. During the election process, there were reports of widespread voter intimidation, ballot box stuffing, and other forms of electoral malpractices by the APUP, aided and abetted by the ruling party, BNP party. The BNP also used its control of the police and other security agencies to intimidate and harass opposition supporters of YPP in favor of the APUP party. Chief Owolowo's party rejected the results, and instead of running to the courts to challenge the results, as was customary, they took the law into their own hands and went on the streets to register their displeasure. This action by the YAC to challenge the results on the streets caused serious uproar and unrest in the Yorobawa region, which later resulted in full-blown violence. Supporters on both sides clashed, some with crude weapons. Hunters showed up with Dane guns loaded with charmed bullets, and naked women clad in native charms roamed the streets with nothing but charms and amulets to cause unimaginable havoc. They identified political opponents, and their houses were doused in fire and set ablaze. Some eyewitnesses reported that they saw houses set ablaze by naked women, throwing nothing but eggs rubbed on their naked breasts. Total chaos and terror reigned on the streets. Many prominent politicians and their relatives were killed, properties worth millions of Muguria destroyed in a matter of days. Members of the public were caught in the middle, and many innocent people lost their lives, properties, and even in some cases their homes. Rather than abating after a few days, the crisis continued to deepen, with both sides unwilling to back down until raging fire was everywhere in the Yorobawa nation. The world watched in sadness and horror. Travels within the region and movements on the highways became a very hazardous proposition, as vehicles were being pulled off the road and set on fire by any of the rival factions, for the flimsiest of reasons. Schools and offices were closed, and there were curfews in many cities in the region. In desperation, people looked towards the federal government that had imposed a state of emergency for much less than what was happening now, just 2 years before, to step in and restore order, but nothing happened. The Prime Minister continued to hide his head in the sand and eat his tuwo while the Yorobawa region burned. Operation Bonfire of Enemies, and the horror it unleashed was so much that the indigenes who witnessed it firsthand would only talk about it in whispered voices for many years thereafter. Meanwhile, some sections of young military officers had been watching the violence and corruption in the land since independence and had become disillusioned with the entire civilian government and their many misdemeanors. What they did next took the nation by storm and the world by shock, and set in motion a series of events that would cost the young nation of Muguland millions of lives and unprecedented destruction of property. More than 50 years after, The nation of Muguland is yet to recover from the consequences of events that were unleashed when the soldiers who had pledged to defend the nation against external aggression decided to interfere in the chaotic internal civilian process.
The night was dark and quiet in Muguland when suddenly gunshots echoed through the city. People woke up to the sounds of military vehicles racing through the streets as soldiers took over major government buildings and installations. The country was under attack, not from an external enemy but from within. It was the first military coup in the country, and the orchestrators were 5 young majors who had grown disillusioned with the corrupt and ineffective civilian government. They saw the country sliding into chaos and poverty, and they believed that the politicians were responsible for it. They also believed that they, as soldiers, had a duty to save the nation from further decay. The leader of the coup was Major Ojugwu, a brilliant and charismatic Okorobia officer who had seen active service in different parts of the world. He was joined by Major Ogbonna, Major Bawanya, Major Ifesinachi, and Major Anufanfa, all of them smart and well-trained officers with a strong sense of duty and patriotism. 4 of these 5 hot-headed majors were Okorobias, and 1 was Yorobawa. None was from the Awosa tribe. Though the motives of these majors would be debated for decades after the fact, one thing nobody could argue was that these young guns were determined, and they were without qualms in shedding the blood of those they felt had betrayed the hopes of the peoples of Muguland. By pre-arrangement, they had decided the tasks beforehand, and who would do what on the night they had chosen to intervene with their guns and put the nation back on course. In the cover of the night, they went about their assignments with ruthless efficiency, led by 4 of the 5 majors. At the end of the bloody night of reckoning, several of the top players on the political scene had been killed by sunrise. Most of the victims were from the Awosa region in the north. The first to go was Muguland's first Prime Minister, Sir Abu Tafafa Balewo. He was abducted from his residence in the capital city of Laskidi and executed as he tried to escape from the military abductors through the bush. It took 5 days to find his bullet-riddled body after the failed coup. Next on the kill list of the majors was the premier of the Awosa region, Sir Mansa Bello. He was brutally assassinated in his home in Kadinat, along with his most senior wife, Hafusat. Their bodies were found riddled with bullets by Major Ogbonna and his ferocious soldiers. The manner of the killing of the Awosa premier, along with his wife, suggested a very personal vendetta against him, coupled with the fact that the murderer was an officer from Okorobia tribe. This was very significant to the Awosas, who had not forgotten nor forgiven the Okorobias to this day for the vicious killings. The coupists then went after Chief Akolamejo, the nemesis of Chief Obafeso Owolowo had been, and a big ally of Sir Mansa Bello, the premier of Awosa region. Chief Akolamejo was caught at the premier's mansion after a fierce shootout with soldiers loyal to him. He was taken to Lagos detention, but eventually brutally gunned down by the bloodthirsty soldiers looking to take their frustrations out on those who have shattered their hopes of a prosperous nation of Muguland. Next was one of the richest Mugulanders at the time and the person in charge of the nation's finances, Chief Okocha Obo. He was reportedly so rich. He was one of the lenders to the nation and the most powerful civilian with connections going all the way to Europe. The majors believed he was the very symbol of corruption and went after him as the only civilian on their kill list. He was abducted at his house, and despite his offer to buy his life with millions of Mugurias, the stone-cold soldiers took him to a desolate landfill in his own luxurious limousine and executed him in cold blood. One of the prominent Yorobawa soldiers stationed in the Awosa region, the General Officer commanding 1st Division Muguland Army, Brigadier Adegunmole, who tried to resist the coup plotters, was gunned down by fierce soldiers loyal to Major Ogbonna. By the time the dust settled, over 22 prominent politicians and powerful military men lay dead in different parts of the country. Unfortunately, the ferocious midnight coup failed due to a variety of reasons. First, one of the 5 majors, Major Ifesinachi, was supposed to have neutralized the most senior military officer then, Major General Ironside, who happened to be from the same tribe as himself. For an inexplicable reason, Major General Ironside was left uncaptured, even after killing the assigned politicians and officers from other tribes. This failure to neutralize the most senior officer in the army at the time, who happened to be from the same tribe as the main coup plotters, fueled the suspicion that the so-called military intervention by the five majors was not aimed at setting the country on the right course, but rather to eliminate officers from other tribes. Many alleged that the whole coup idea by the five majors was conceived from the very beginning to make the Yorobawa general the leader of the country, and put the Yorobawians in charge of the whole country under military rule. True or not, those allegations persist until this day. Secondly, though the plan of the majors, as stated by them, was to seize power and install a military government that would cleanse the country of corruption and incompetence, they themselves did not appear ready to govern properly. They had acted swiftly and decisively, capturing the major radio and TV stations and making a broadcast to the nation. In the broadcast, they announced that the civilian government had been overthrown and a new era of accountability and progress would begin. Unfortunately, that was as far as they knew to do. They had no plan on what to do after cleansing the land of the alleged corrupt officers and politicians. As they wavered and scrambled to get the next steps in place, the more experienced Major General Ironside, whom Major Ifesinachi from the same tribe had spared, organized a quick counter-coup and seized the reins of power from the young, inexperienced coup plotters before they could get organized to govern. The original coup plotters were all rounded up and thrown in jail, just as Major General Ironside consolidated his hold on power at their expense. This first coup had opened the Pandora's box and had given the military officers in Muguland a taste of power. And like Dracula, once they tasted blood, they kept coming back for more, with coup after coup for decades and totally smothering the fledgling democracy in Muguland to death. The intervention of the five majors shook the country to its core, and the counter-coup by Major General Ironside set in motion a series of events that would shape the future of Muguland. Some people hailed the original coup as a necessary evil, while others condemned it as a violation of the democratic principles the country had fought so hard to establish. The military government promised to return the country to civilian rule, but as time went on, it became clear that they were not in a hurry to relinquish power. The five majors, who had once been seen as saviors, soon became the evildoers who introduced the military into Muguland's political history, as many people began to feel disillusioned and oppressed under military rule. No matter how anyone saw it, no one argued that the coup marked a turning point in the country's history, a moment when the dream of democracy was shattered and the rule of law was replaced by the rule of the gun.
After the coup, Major General Ironside emerged as the new military head of state of Muguland, taking over from the ousted civilian government. Many Mugulanders saw Ironside as a unifying figure who could bring the country together after the ethnic tension and political crises that had plagued the country in the preceding years. Ironside's first priority was to restore order and stability in the land. He dissolved the regional governments and replaced them with a unified military government known as the Muguland Military Council, or MMC. He also appointed military governors to head the country's new 12 states, which were divided along mostly geographic rather than ethnic lines. However, Ironside's attempts to bring the country together had met with resistance from some quarters. The Awosa region, in particular, saw Ironside's appointment as a threat to their dominance and influence in the country. There were also concerns that Ironside's actions were veering towards a more centralized government, which would further erode the autonomy of the regions. The Awosa people also felt the original and counter-coups were targeted at the Awosas specifically. Therefore, they observed him with wariness while they quietly planned their own moves to exact revenge. The lopsided coup ensured the most illustrious Awosa politicians and soldiers were eliminated, eventually leading to widespread violence, particularly in the northern region, where many Yorobawas were killed in reprisal attacks. At first, many people were supportive of the coup, seeing it as a way to rid the country of corrupt politicians and usher in a new era of stability and progress. However, as the coup leaders began to purge the government and arrest prominent figures, including some of the former civilian leaders, it became clear that they had a different agenda. They suspended the constitution, abolished political parties, and centralized power in the hands of the military. With a few decrees, and in just a matter of weeks, the civilian federal democracy that was brought about in Muguland, after decades of agitation by the founding fathers of the nation, was brought to a screeching halt by General Ironside. It was a sad and sudden death of the first federal republic in Muguland, and the world shook its collective heads in sorrow. Episode 15, The Disillusioned General. The disillusioned general stood tall, his eyes reflecting the weight of countless battles. He had seen the rise and fall of empires, the fleeting nature of power. Now he faced his greatest challenge yet. A call to statesmanship, a plea for unity in a fractured world. Major General Ojugwu was a charismatic, cerebral and prominent Muguland military officer who became the leader of the Okorobia people in the course of his distinguished career as a soldier. In the aftermath of General Ironside's rise to power, the profile of General Ojugwu as one of the distinguished sons of the Okorobia tribe continued to rise. Ojugwu was appointed military governor of the Okorobia region in January 1966, after the first coup that toppled the government of Sir Abu Tafafa Balewo. He retained his position in the counter-coup that brought Ironside to power, and was still standing when General Wongo seized power at the center in the third military coup to rock the young nation in less than 1 year. Chukwuma Ojugwu, as a rising Okorobian star in Muguland, was known for his charisma, intelligence and dedication to the people of his Okorobia tribe. It was obvious to the blind that he had a bright future ahead of him in the federal government, even as he served as the military governor of the Okorobia region. However, things began to change when the Muguland military government, led by General Yakubu Wongo, announced that it would be dividing the country into 12 states, rather than the previous 4 regions. Ojugwu and other Okorobia leaders were deeply suspicious of the plan, believing that it would lead to their tribe being marginalized and stripped of its political power. Their fears were not unfounded. When Wongo implemented the plan, the Okorobia region was split into 3 smaller states, with the Okorobias making up the majority of the population in each one. This left them with less representation and fewer resources than they had enjoyed before, and tension began to simmer. Ojugwu was not one to back down from a fight, and he began to speak out publicly against the policies of the Wongo government. He argued that the Okorobias were being unfairly treated, and that they needed greater autonomy in order to protect their rights and interests. Ojugwu became increasingly disillusioned with the Wongo government's handling of the crisis in the country, especially its response to the genocide that followed the 1966 coup. He believed that the federal government was neglecting the Okorobia region and was unhappy with the military government's insistence on a unitary state structure rather than the more decentralized federation it inherited at independence. As his rhetoric grew more and more strident, Ojugwu began to lose the support of some of his former allies in the federal government. They saw him as too radical, too confrontational, and too willing to risk everything on a single issue of unitarism or federalism. However, Ojugwu was undeterred. He continued to press his case, even as the Wongo government cracked down on his supporters and allies. He believed that the Okorobia people were worth fighting for, and he was willing to do whatever it took to secure their rights and their future. Little did anyone know at the time that the events unfolding in Muguland would soon lead to a full-blown civil war.
Episode 16, The Yorobawa Lion, Unchained. Meanwhile, before the Colonel Wongo junta seized power from General Ironside in the third coup to rock Muguland, another consequential event unfolded for the new nation. Chief Obajimi Ezekiel Owolowo, also known as the Yorobawa Lion, had been sentenced to 10 years in prison for treasonable felony, but even after 2 years his supporters were still fighting for his release. They believed that he was innocent of the charges against him, and they were determined to bring him home. As the Lion continued to cool his heels in jail while things deteriorated all over the country, the pressure on the government to release Chief Owolowo grew exponentially. Protests erupted across the country, and there were calls from international human rights organizations for his immediate release. At the same time, the new military junta, which had seized power in a bloody coup led by General Ironside, also debated extensively in their Supreme Military Council meetings the merits and demerits of releasing the Yorobawa Lion from prison. As the debate grew, Brigadier Ojugwu reminded the council that the original coup by the 5 majors, which the General Ironside junta had foiled before seizing power for themselves, had intended to bring him out of prison and make him the president of Muguland, if their coup had succeeded. He then opined it would douse tension among the middle-rank officers if their hero was released from prison and simply placed under house arrest for a few years. He advised that keeping the Yorobawa Lion in prison may encourage other trigger-happy young officers still in uniform to try another coup that may take all of them out. Besides, the brigadier urged we need the lion to help us douse tensions among the Yorobawas in the west, so we can focus on consolidating our regime and find a workable solution to the problems posed by the Okorobians and their leader, Major General Ojugwu in the east. After much debate, the Council of General Ironside reached a decision to release Chief Owolowo from prison, and an internal memorandum to release him was signed by General Ironside. A plane was then sent from Lasgidi, the capital city of Muguland, to go and bring him home from the eastern prison of Kalabara, which was under the control of the Okorobia regional governor, Major General Ojugwu. Unfortunately, before the order to release the Yorobawa lion could be executed, another coup occurred and General Ironside was killed along with most members of his cabinet in a new coup that brought 31-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Wongo into power. The new coup halted the planned release, but after about 5 days, once the new regime had secured its hold on power, the order to release Chief Owolowo, which had been signed by General Ironside before he was killed, was not rescinded by the new government. Thus it was that after serving just over 2 years of the 10-year treasonable felony sentence in prison, Chief Owolowo was released. It was a moment of great joy and celebration for his supporters, who had been fighting tirelessly for his freedom. However, the circumstances surrounding his release in such a tumultuous time of change in government were shrouded in mystery. Some said that it was the result of secret negotiations between Chief Owolowo and the government. Others claimed that it was due to the pressure of international public opinion. Some said it was facilitated by General Ojugwu to serve his own purposes, while others were sure it was General Wongo who signed the release order and not General Ironside. Whatever the truth behind the release of Chief Owolowo, one thing was certain. The decision to release Chief Owolowo had come from the highest levels of government. The new military head of state, General Yakubu Wongo, had reportedly ordered the original order for his release to be executed as a gesture of goodwill to his tribesmen at a time he needed the support of the Yorobawas to consolidate his hold on power after executing most of the senior Okorobia officers during his coup. Whatever the real reasons, once the decision was made to release the popular leader of the Yorobawa people, there was still the matter of how to get Chief Owolowo out of prison and back home safely. At the time of the release, he was being held at the Kalabara prison, which was under the control of the Okorobian leader, Major General Ojugwu. Major General Ojugwu was still disgruntled over the large-scale murder of officers from his tribe in the northern Awosa lands, and he was yet to fully accept the leadership of General Wongo as the new head of state. In the end, Major General Ojugwu, who had been appointed the governor of the Okorobia region by his kinsman, General Ironside, before he was killed in the military coup, honored the original order of release signed by General Ironside before his death, and made the arrangement for Chief Owolowo's release from the Kalabara prison. He also found it easy to comply with the release order because he had a personal relationship with Chief Owolowo and had his own agenda in seeing that Chief Owolowo was released from prison. On the day of his release, Chief Owolowo was escorted out of prison by Major General Ojugwu's men. They informed him that arrangements have been made to fly him down to Lasgidi to meet with the new head of state, but they first had to take him to Major General Ojugwu's office for a brief meeting. It was a moment of triumph for Chief Owolowo and his supporters, but it was also a reminder of the political divisions and tensions that still existed in Muguland. Despite the release of Chief Owolowo, the country was still grappling with the simmering anger of the tribes and the chaotic state of the government that had witnessed 3 coups in less than 1 year while he was cooling his heels in prison. He knew the newly independent Muguland nation was still on very shaky legs and would need delicate handling if the whole thing was not going to blow up in their faces.
Episode 17. The Return of the Okorobian Diaspora from Different Parts of Muguland. Amid the increasing hostility in different parts of Muguland, the Okorobians, particularly those in the north, began to perceive an existential threat to their tribe and way of life from the other Muguland tribes. Despite the widespread violence they faced, Many Okorobians refused to see the development as a direct consequence of their leaders' actions in the first coup, where leaders from other tribes, mainly the Awosas, were targeted. In their collective mindset, the violence was not a reaction to past events but stemmed from deep-seated envy and hatred towards the Okorobians by other Muguland tribes, especially the Awosas, who were supposedly jealous of their enterprising personality, economic prosperity wherever they go, and business ingenuity. This belief fueled their decision to embark on a mass exodus to their eastern homeland, reminiscent of the historic Israelite journey to Palestine. In fervent town hall meetings, leaders rallied their people. "We must return to our roots, to a land where we are not envied but respected for our contributions," one leader proclaimed. In hushed conversations, a growing sense of urgency spread among the Okorobians, echoing the historic exodus of the Israelites to Palestine. Comparisons to the Jewish plight under Hitler's regime were drawn, fueling their resolve to also go back to their ancestral lands and form a community that would protect itself from the tribal prejudice of the rest of Muguland. In one of the many town hall meetings called to discuss their options, Mazi Chinonso, an Okorobian elder, passionately declared, "Our safety lies in the heart of our motherland, in the east. Like the Israelites, we must return to where we belong, where we can stand united against oppression." As the violence against Okorobians escalated, the sentiment of returning to their ancestral lands gained momentum. The Okorobians never acknowledged the role of their officers in the initial coup as tribally motivated. Instead, the Okorobians still continued to see the violence against them as driven by envy and hatred rather than retribution. "Brothers and sisters, the time has come," Brother Leo Obazel, another feisty Okorobian leader, announced in a crowded assembly. "We must embark on our exodus to the east, to our true home. Our unity there will be our shield." The movement swelled as discussions transformed into action. The Great Okorobia Exodus began, marked by a mass migration of Okorobians from the northern and western regions of Muguland back to their eastern homeland. This Okorobian exodus, fueled by a deep desire for safety and self-preservation, became a significant chapter in the history of Muguland. It began as a trickle of a few groups of people packing up what they could carry and getting on the road to go back home. Then it became a mass migration of Okorobians back to their homeland from the Awosa region in the north and the Yorobawa region in the west. This mass exodus eventually became known as the Return of the Okorobians, and it was a significant as well as an unforgettable event in the history of Muguland. The reasons for the Great Return were many. The Okorobians, one of the largest ethnic groups in Muguland, had been living in other parts of the country, particularly in the Awosa region in the north and the Yorobawa region in the west, where they had established businesses and homes. But their presence was not always welcomed by other ethnic groups, particularly the Awosas, who were dominant in the region. The Okorobians are generally seen as being very aggressive, overly industrious in business, and prone to dominating any area they settled in any region or country they found themselves. Due to their proclivity to acclimatize easily and dominate any economy with their shrewd business practices, many of the tribes in Muguland were always suspicious of them, and often delight in any opportunity to put them in their place, sometimes with very little provocation. In a part of Black Africa where ethnic groups were naturally suspicious of each other, the suspicion of the Okorobians and the violent xenophobia against them was much higher than normal. In a twist of irony, many of the other tribes in Muguland would often accuse the Okorobians of doing to the other tribes exactly what they were doing to them. They were often accused of keeping their own lands to themselves while they preyed on the ancestral lands of other tribes. Whatever the ultimate reasons for the return of the Okorobia diaspora, it was a difficult decision for many, as they had built their lives and businesses in the north and had to leave everything behind. But they knew that their safety and survival depended on it. The journey back to the southeast was often arduous and dangerous. While the majority escaped via bus and railway transport, many Okorobians traveled on foot, carrying only what they could carry on their backs. They walked for miles under the scorching sun, sleeping under trees at night, and relying on the kindness of strangers for food and water. For most of them, the return journey was made even more difficult by the fact that the government at the center was not supportive of the mass Okorobia return. The government feared that the mass movement of people would destabilize the country and devastate the economies of the localities they were fleeing from, so they did not provide any serious assistance to the Okorobians. Despite these challenges, the Okorobians persevered, driven by a sense of determination and a desire to return to their homeland. When they arrived in the southeast, they found that their return had a profound impact on the region. They established new businesses and farms, and their skills and hard work helped to boost the economy of the region. As they started over from scratch in their familial home, many Okorobians were full of resentment at the treatment they had received from the other tribes in Muguland. Soon, some began to wonder aloud if it made any sense for Okorobians to remain in the political contraption called Muguland. The Great Return also had a significant impact on the Muguland Civil War. When the war broke out, the Okorobians were able to draw on the strength and unity that they had developed during their journey back to the southeast. They were a proud and resilient people determined to defend their homeland against all odds. As they prepared for war, the Okorobians shared stories of their journeys back home, reminiscing about the hardships and the camaraderie that they had experienced. These stories helped to humanize the conflict, reminding everyone that the war was not just about politics and power, but also about the lives and livelihoods of real people. I remember the long journey back home, one Okorobian young man said to his comrades, the heat, the hunger, and the thirst. But also, the sense of camaraderie that we shared. We were all in this together, and we knew that we would survive, no matter what. Another Okorobian from Nui nodded in agreement. Yes, and that is the same spirit that we will bring to this war. We are a strong and resilient people, and we will fight to defend our homeland. The Great Return was a difficult and challenging event in Muguland history, but it also showed the strength and resilience of the Okorobian people. They were able to overcome incredible challenges, both economically and culturally. The Okorobians brought with them a wealth of knowledge, skills, and traditions that helped to shape the culture and society of the southeastern part of Muguland. As one Okorobian soldier put it later, we may have left our homes and our businesses behind, but we never left our spirit and our determination. We are a proud and resilient people, and we will fight to defend our way of life no matter the cost. But the Great Return was not without its challenges. The sudden influx of so many people put a strain on the resources of the region, and there were shortages of food and housing. Many Okorobians had to live in crowded refugee camps without proper sanitation or medical care. Unfortunately, this congestion of so many people in a small geographical area would later have very tragic consequences during the War of Brothers that was to come later.
We were children of the dawn when the light first broke through, promised a future bright and strong in a land so vast, so true. But they sold our hopes for gold, traded dreams for bitter lies. Now the stories of the boy